Right now, you're angry at God for the relationship that ended, devastated about the person who walked away, and convinced that he took away your blessing, when actually he just saved you from your greatest nightmare disguised as your answered prayer. That person you're still crying over at night, still checking their social media to see if they've moved on, still hoping will text you, saying they made a mistake. God saw something in them that you refused to see because you were blinded by chemistry, distracted by their potential, and desperately clinging to the version of them you imagined, rather than the reality of who they actually were. What you're about to discover will completely transform how you view every closed door, every unanswered text, every relationship that seemed perfect until it suddenly wasn't, and every person you begged God to bring back who he kept pushing further away, because the shocking truth is that God's protection often feels like rejection. His redirection looks like disappointment, and his greatest acts of love sometimes manifest as the relationships he refuses to allow, no matter how much you pray, fast, or try to force what he's actively preventing for reasons you won't understand, until you're standing in the future, looking back at the bullet you didn't even know you dodged. Subscribe to Faith Ablaze Network and hit that notification bell immediately, because what I'm about to reveal will expose the hidden ways God protects you from relationships you think you want, show you the devastating consequences he spared you from, and prove that what you called rejection was actually divine intervention that saved your life, your calling, and your destiny from someone whose presence would have cost you everything you've been praying for while you were busy praying for them to come back. The first shocking way God protects you from wrong relationships is by closing doors you keep trying to reopen, making reconciliation impossible despite your desperate prayers and repeated attempts to revive what he's already pronounced dead. Because he sees the version of that person they will become 5 years from now that would destroy the woman or man he's been developing in you through the very isolation you're resenting. You're crying because they left, but God is celebrating because he finally got them out before their unhealed trauma became your daily torment, before their hidden addictions became your financial ruin, before their unresolved issues became your children's inheritance, and before their spiritual compromise became the reason you walked away from your calling, because you can't serve two masters, and you were about to choose them over him. What you don't know is that the relationship you're mourning would have required you to shrink your personality, dim your light, silence your voice, and apologize for the anointing that made them uncomfortable, and God loved you too much to watch you become a smaller version of yourself, just to make an insecure person feel adequate in their mediocrity. Jeremiah 29:11 promises that God knows the plans he has for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. But that future was incompatible with the person whose presence in your life would have redirected your steps away from destiny and toward disappointment, that you would have normalized as just how relationships are, when actually it was just how toxic relationships operate when you settle for someone God never sent. The second devastating protection method God uses is allowing you to see their true character after the breakup in ways you would have excused or ignored if you were still together, because now that your emotions aren't clouding your judgment, you can finally see the manipulation you called love, the control you mistook for care, the disrespect you rationalized as their communication style, and the red flags you painted green because you were so invested in making it work that you became blind to clear warnings that everyone around you could see, except you. Suddenly, you notice how they're treating their new person. Exactly how they treated you in the beginning. The same love bombing, the same promises, the same intensity that felt special when you were receiving it, but now looks like a pattern of behavior rather than genuine connection tailored specifically to who you are as an individual. You're watching them post the relationship you thought you wanted, seeing them give someone else the commitment they claimed they weren't ready for with you, and it's breaking your heart until you realize that what you're actually witnessing is God showing you that you didn't lose a good person who needed more time to be ready. You escaped a manipulator who was never going to choose you, no matter how perfect you became, because the problem was never your inadequacy, but their inability to truly love anyone beyond what that person could provide. For their ego, their image, or their convenience. Proverbs 4:23 commands you to guard your heart above all else, because everything you do flows from it. And God is guarding your heart by showing you that what you thought was love was actually just performance. What felt like connection was actually just transaction, and what seemed like potential was actually just patterns they've repeated with every person before you and will repeat with everyone after, until they finally decide to do the internal work that no relationship can do for them. The third hidden way God protects you is by making you emotionally unavailable to the right person until He removes the wrong one from your system. Because if He brought your actual God-ordained partner while you're still attached to someone who was never meant to stay, you would compare them unfavorably to the fantasy version of your ex that never actually existed except in your imagination, fueled by hope and delusion. You would sabotage real covenant love because it doesn't feel like the toxic intensity you mistook for passion. You would run from healthy commitment because it feels boring compared to the chaos you normalized as excitement, and you would reject someone who actually values you because you've been conditioned to chase people who make you work for crumbs of affection while calling it love. God is using this painful season to detox you from trauma bonds you thought were soul ties, to heal you from abandonment wounds you've been carrying since childhood that made you cling to anyone who showed you attention regardless of how poorly they treated you, and to rewire your understanding of what love actually looks like, according to 1 Corinthians 13:4-7, which describes it as patient and kind, not jealous or boastful, not proud or rude, not self-seeking or easily angered, keeping no record of wrongs, not delighting in evil but rejoicing with truth, always protecting, always trusting, always hoping, always persevering. And when you measure your past relationship against these biblical standards, you'll realize it failed almost every single criterion, which means what you lost wasn't love at all, but a counterfeit that God mercifully removed before you built your entire life on a process. The foundation of sand that Matthew 7:26-7 warns will collapse when storms come, and great will be the fall of that house. The fourth shocking protection God provides is positioning you to meet people who treat you better, so you can finally see the contrast between what you settled for and what you actually deserve. Because sometimes you don't know you've been eating scraps until someone offers you a full meal, and you realize how malnourished you've been spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, while convincing yourself you were satisfied. You start meeting people who text back promptly instead of playing games, who make plans and keep them instead of canceling last minute, who pursue you consistently instead of disappearing and reappearing whenever they feel like it, who speak life over your dreams instead of competing with your calling, and suddenly you realize that the relationship you're mourning wasn't as special as you thought. Because what felt extraordinary to you was actually just basic human decency. That should be the bare minimum expectation in any healthy connection. God is expanding your awareness of what's possible by introducing you to people who demonstrate through their actions that love doesn't have to hurt, relationships don't require constant anxiety about where you stand, and commitment doesn't demand you sacrifice your identity to maintain someone's interest. And this contrast is His way of healing your broken picker that's been malfunctioning since childhood. Trauma taught you that love equals pain, that you have to earn affection through performance, and that if someone isn't making you cry, they must not really care. Which is demonic theology that 2 Timothy 1-7 contradicts by declaring that God has not given you a spirit of fear, but of power and love, and a sound mind, meaning the relationship that kept you in fear about their commitment, confused about their intentions, and questioning your worth was never from God, regardless of how much you prayed about it or how strongly you felt about them. The fifth and most powerful way God protects you from wrong relationships is by using the pain of loss to push you into the purpose you've been avoiding, because sometimes He has to make you so uncomfortable in your current season that you finally step into the calling you've been delaying. The business you've been postponing, the ministry you've been scared to launch, and the version of yourself you've been too distracted to become while you were pouring all your emotional energy into someone who was never going to reciprocate at the level you deserved. Romans 8:28 promises that God works all things together for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. And He's working even this painful rejection for your good by removing the distraction disguised as destiny and creating space in your life for the actual assignments that require your full attention, your complete emotional availability, and the kind of single-minded focus that's impossible when you're constantly checking your phone, hoping for breadcrumbs from someone who should be giving you the whole meal. What you don't see yet is that 5 years from now, you'll be thriving in purpose, walking in authority, operating in anointing, and building kingdom impact. That would have been impossible if you were still trying to convince that person of your value instead of recognizing that your worth was never up for debate, because Psalm 139:14 already established that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and anyone who couldn't see that didn't deserve access to the treasure. God spent your entire life preparing for someone who would recognize, appreciate, and steward the gift of your presence with the reverence it deserves. Right now, you're asking God why He took them away, but one day you'll thank Him for protecting you from what you thought you wanted by giving you something infinitely better. Not necessarily a different person, but a different version of yourself who's healed enough to attract healthy love, whole enough to recognize counterfeit connection, and secure enough in divine identity to walk away from anything that requires you to compromise your peace, your purpose, or your calling for the temporary comfort of companionship that costs more than it contributes. If this message opened your eyes to how God's protection often looks like rejection, and you're ready to trust His process instead of forcing your preference, subscribe to Faith Ablaze Network and hit that bell for truth that heals your heart while guarding your destiny. Comment what country you're watching from and share this with someone who's still heartbroken over a relationship. God closed. They need to know that what they lost wasn't their blessing, but their burden. And what's coming will prove that God's timing is always perfect, even when His methods feel painful.